I'm going to talk about worry, fear, and anxiety, something that we all experience from time to time, and something that many of us suffer under. Worry, fear, and anxiety. And I have called to assist me this morning in talking about this Reverend Warren Teachout, a Unity minister, also the husband of David Adams, one of our chaplains. Warren, would you come forward, please? You can take that end chair. And, yay. And Reverend Nhien is here with us this morning as well. She does the 12:15 service. So Nhien, come on out. There is a wonderful story written by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the fellow that wrote Sherlock Holmes. And he tells of a man in the old days that's discharged from the army, and he's on his way home by foot. Well, darkness comes upon him. He's tired, exhausted, hasn't eaten, and he comes across a house that is vacant. So he makes his way into the house, finds a mattress in the corner of the bedroom, and lays down and goes to sleep. Well, in the morning, when he gets up and he prepares to leave, he discovers signs on the house where it's been quarantined because the people there had leprosy or some side of a disease that was very contagious. His first thought was, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? I'm sure that I've contracted that same disease. And as he's walking along that day, he discovers white spots on his body, which convinces him he has this terminal disease. He finally makes it home, but for the safety of his family, he starts to live in a little shack on the far end of their property. And he lives there for 20 years, isolated from everybody, because he doesn't want to make them sick. Then one day he comes down with the flu or a cold or something. He thinks he's dying. He sends word to bring a doctor. The doctor comes, checks him out, and he says, you just have an influenza. It's not life-threatening. And then he says, what about these white spots all over my body? And he looked at the white spots and he said, well, I think that's just a reaction from extreme stress at some point where your system was shocked, but it's nothing dangerous at all. Now, he lived in isolation for 20 years, depriving himself of the company of other people, depriving himself of life's luxuries, depriving himself of joy and happiness because he thought he had a disease that was going to kill him. He was worried about it, fearful of it, and very anxious about it. When it comes to worry, fear, and anxiety, let me say those emotions are natural when they are confined to our survival, our safety, or our wellness. We all have a right to worry about things that might be life-threatening, but everything else are imaginary fears and worries and anxieties. 92% of everything we worry about never happens. All wasted time where we're depriving ourselves, just like the man, from living a life that is confident, that has a certain amount of joy to it, and a certain amount of privilege in moving around. So since this is such a widespread problem, especially within the human condition, I thought I'd ask Warren and Nhien to share some of their thoughts with me today about this worry phenomena that seems to affect everybody. And another interesting thing is you don't find worry, stress, and anxiety anywhere else in nature except for safety, wellness, and survival. Animals, fishes, birds, none of them engage in all these imaginary worries that we have. So, Nhien, I ask you, and let me get you a microphone. Thank you. You seem like a pretty sharp cookie. Do you worry? Are you worried now?
Yes. Yes, yeah, so I want to start by saying, that this wasn't pre-planned, so I had no idea what story Duke would be sharing here today, and that's always a cause of worry, concern. So I think this one was relatively mild, so that's okay. So yeah, wow, but the story, Duke, brings up a lot for me, because I mean, when you talk about worry, my first instinct was to go to this. So Father Thomas Keating, who is a mystical Catholic, teaches that there are 3 emotional programs for happiness, and these are actually not ways that we find deep foundational peace and happiness, but ways in which we look for proxies. And the 3 basic ways are either control and autonomy, the first emotional program. The second is approval or esteem. And the third is security and certainty. And that all of us, of course, have all 3, but we tend to falter in one area more than others. Mm-hmm. And so for me, much of our human existence, advertisements, etc., are oriented toward trying to alleviate our concerns in these areas in the outer world, right? Oh, look this way and you're going to be able to get the esteem and approval of others. Get enough in your bank account and at one point you'll be able to feel secure and certain, right? And so for me, a story like that brings up like the deeper spiritual underpinnings, which is, well, great. In the end, he figured out that he didn't have this condition, but I want to know how to live even knowing you do. Like, how do you live with a base level of fundamental lack of worry in that you trust the fundamentally good, benevolent, loving nature of life. Mm-hmm. And so for me, hearing a story like that makes me encounter what in me, if I'm able to do that, then ironically, if something like that happened to me, I would be more likely to check it out first, right? Because it wouldn't be so devastating to discover the worst case scenario. Like if I know a base of being and a base of security and a base of faith that is so much bigger than knowing that my body will last a certain number of years, then I can encounter and welcome reality in a more profound way. So ironically, that's going to equip me to become more skilled to live more vibrantly from the outset, So I'm more likely to check things out because it won't devastate me to find out if that's true. Mm-hmm. I think it's our fear of being devastated by the reality of what we need to check out that keeps us worrying instead of actually checking it out, doing a reality check. Have you ever been in a relationship where it's like you kind of worry that they don't love you or they don't like you, but you never really want to ask? You ever really want to know? Like you fear that if you show up and you ask for what you really want, then you'll really know the answer, And so the profound thing of going, I can be okay with any answer, enables me to welcome life as it is and embrace reality. So that's what came up for me.
Well, let me ask you this. Why are we as human beings, most of us, so obsessed with winning approval of other people? I have a lot of friends and a lot of people that come here that are going onto the websites to find somebody to date. And after the original date, if one person doesn't call back and the other person's devastated, there's nobody out there for me. I'll never find somebody that I like. And what's wrong with me? Why wouldn't that person call back? And that seems to be kind of an inherent condition within us, approval seeking. I know that harsh criticism and other forms of negativity when it comes to communicating with people can really be hurtful, just as hurtful as a physical wound. So why is that,
The ultimate questions of the universe. So yeah, why is that? Well, I believe that everything we yearn for, that there's nothing wrong with anything we yearn for, but there is that which is misguided in how we seek it. Like, for instance, I believe that our desire for approval and esteem, that's in all of us. is at root, if you look at it from like a core unity perspective, I believe that everything is driven from like what we call these divine ideas, the one of them being love, ultimate love. And so if we know love, if we know God's love, if we know divine love, if we know unconditional love at like the depths of our being within ourselves, then we don't go seeking for it in the world. But even our seeking for it, to me, there's a heart to that is driven by this intrinsic maybe memory that we do belong to each other, that we were meant to be connected to each other. And all the ways we scramble for approval and connection are ways in which we want to sort of live out this basic like knowing that oneness is actually already there. We seek to like mimic it in our relationships. And so for me, it comes from something rooted in something deeply fundamental, true, and good about us. Because we can often say, well, I shouldn't be so needy, I shouldn't want that. It's more of like, oh, let's lean into that want. And go, what is really driving it? Maybe there's a part of me that really just wants to know that I am indeed one with life, that I am not separate, that I am not alone. And if I could lean inside in meditation and prayer into that knowing, then I move forward into the world, not seeking to acquire that knowing through someone else's witnessing of it. You know, and so, but for me, having compassion for ourselves, for the ways that we long for our parents' approval, for our children's approval, you know, for our boss's approval some days, and you know, just to have compassion for our humanity in that, and just to remember that it's not about it being bad, but about it being misdirected. That nothing outside of us can give us that sense of well-being, and to turn that into the knowing of love like within ourselves, you know. Yeah.
Thank you.
What about Warren? I'd like to hear what he has to say.
You trying to pass the mic? Well, yes, but I'd like to ask you one more, and this pertains to both of you. You being an Asian American,
Yes.
and Warren being a gay man, I am sure that you meet with more disapproval or discrimination than a lot of other people would. And how are you able to maintain a sense of balance and esteem when it seems like the cards are stacked against you when you go out into the world?
Great question. Yeah, I'll let Warren answer first.
All right.
Okay, first of all, it was a journey. Because when I figured out that I was gay, I'll be honest, there was a lot of self-hatred with that. And it was like, well, why can't God change me? And so then when I wasn't changing, you know, that was very, very disappointing. But the self-acceptance came as part of my spiritual journey, as part of finding unity and realizing that our higher power, God, whatever you want to call it, doesn't make mistakes. And that I am who I am, that I have gifts to share, and that even this journey of being gay helps me to have compassion, I believe, for other people. And so it's a gift that I wouldn't trade for anything.
Thank you. On the tail of that, I'd like to say, was it 22 years ago? I married Warren and David on this very stage. And he's a minister now, and David is pursuing ministry, so they're moving into the unity movement, and they're just a blessing to this entire community. You are too.
Okay. So feeling discriminated against. No. Yeah. I think I've shared in various talks that, you know, when we first, you know, I'm a refugee, and I grew up in Southern California, and I grew up in a town where the only other Asian family in the town was my cousins. And so just everyone else was basically Presbyterian and white. And, you know, as a kid, all you want to do is fit in. You know, so there was a lot of self-rejection around what I looked like, around the fact that, even though it's cool now, that we had incense burning in the house, and that was weird for kids nearby, like, what is that? We'd get questions like, do you eat dogs? Just everything that like told me, like even when I started to feel like I belonged, people would ask me questions like that told me that's not how they see it. And so that was much of like my childhood experience. And, I think I shared once long ago in a sermon that like as a kid, the beautiful people around me were all blonde and blue-eyed. This is Southern California. And all I wanted, I used Sun-In to try to like lighten, my mom got very upset, but I, try to lighten my hair. And so there was always the, what I naturally am is not good enough. But I can try to conform and try to make myself into that, which is approved of and valued. And actually, it wasn't really until Unity that shifted for me, that like the teaching that you are whole, that you are fundamentally good and good enough, was like for me like the huge teaching of Unity, because I came from a life experience that was so radically different from that. Even not like fitting into my family, because there is that like, you're not Asian enough, and in my family you're not Vietnamese enough. And then in the world, you're too Vietnamese, and so there's like, what am I supposed to be? And then I have to say that when I first moved out here, it was difficult because in Northern California, there are a lot of Asians. And in coming out here, I went to seminary, and there was only one Chinese American woman in my class, and they constantly confused me for her. She got pregnant, and people were still calling me her name. I'm like, really? Like, do we really look that the same? Like, do you not see who I am? But I have to say something about healing. Early on, I don't know about you, Warren, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, but early on, I'll be the questioner, early on, it was devastating early on. This is why, again, Unity is so valuable, because in the beginning, I really saw it as a divide. And when people would, the first thing out of people's mouths was about me being Asian, or, but that's not how I experienced myself. I'm like, I'm a normal person with everyday feelings. It's like, the first thing you say to me is, oh, I have a Vietnamese friend. To me, that's not on my radar in this moment, right? But, the more I feel that sort of sense of well-being and wholeness, the more I can understand that you're reaching out is a way you're reaching out to connect. That if you are ignorant of it and you're actually asking me questions, that's actually a way you're reaching toward, rather than taking offense at it, and really understanding that in our one-to-one interaction, we have an opportunity to bridge that divide, that I can help you know what you didn't know, and that I can come to know you, but like one-on-one. And so without that woundedness that we can each have around whatever it is, it could be being Asian American, it could be being gay, it could be coming from a relatively poor background, right? The things that make us think that like, oh, like you only see this, but maybe if I'm grounded, I can have the opportunity to go, oh, right, you only see that. But in your movement towards me, I have the opportunity to show you something else by being willing to relate to you, being willing to connect, rather than react from that wounded place. Yeah, so. Do you want to elaborate, Warren?
Well, I just realized I didn't answer Duke's question really about the discrimination. So I came of age. I graduated from college in 1987 and started work. And at that time, people were still very much in the closet. And I remember my first job, being in the cafeteria with my coworkers, and I could somewhat pass as a straight man, and I wasn't out. And just hearing the gay jokes, that was really, really hard. And so I felt discrimination that way, and I felt like if I did come out, then there would be really, really bad consequences about it. But, Nhien was talking about wholeness and completeness, and in our oneness, when we realize that we are one with God, and we realize that we're one with each other, so much of that worry and that anxiety just kind of falls away.
Well, we live in a universe that's been intricately put together over 14 billion years. We now have 7 to 8 billion people on this earth, and every single person is perfect in their own way. It's just, whether it's the advertising media or discriminations or prejudice that make us think that we're not okay. But that's not natural. We weren't born with that. There's not a baby born into this world that has low self-esteem. And that comes along as a result of the culture that we live in. So to constantly remind ourselves, I am perfect in every way, is a practice, because we're bombarded on a daily basis by something out there telling us that we're not. And there's a fellow named Murray Banks who was the head of the University of Minnesota, and he would travel all over the world speaking. And some point during the talk, everybody got a little 5x7 card, and he asked them to put a number on that card as to how they rated themselves on a degree of 1 to 10. And he said most of the cards held up would be 5s or 6s, occasionally a 1 or a 2, sometimes a 7 or an 8. Only once did he see someone hold up a 10. And it was a little girl who was suffering from cerebral palsy. She was in a wheelchair in the audience. And after his talk, he went down to seek her out. He said, I'm interested in how you rated yourself 10. And she said, and this went on to become a phenomena on social media, but she said, because God doesn't make junk. Everybody is perfect, just who you are, just how you live your life. Only thing that makes us imperfect is our ability not to treat other people as if they're perfect. And then everything becomes free.
I have an addendum to that. That's my legal talk, addendum. So, but what you said reminded me of like our core mantra here, where diversity is praised. There's one thing to tolerate diversity and another thing to actively embrace it. And I want to say that I think each and every one of us does it very imperfectly, but the intention to do that here, to me, comes from this idea that like, wow, in most of the world, if you are different from me, like even if you have a different view, like if I come to find out your political views are just slightly different, like there's something in us that contracts, that doesn't want to embrace diversity. We say that in here, and we can embrace things in a generic way, because, in a sort of liberal, like, yes, we accept all people as they are, but when confronted with this, like, oh, you have a different view of sports even than I do, like there's a tension of like, what does that mean? And I think that our coming together here is fundamentally about the encountering of difference in a way that celebrates that if we deeply, deeply believe that oneness that Warren was just beautifully talking about, like really get that. If we believe that there is only one power and one presence in the universe, then nothing truly is against us. And so even an opposing view doesn't have to violate our sense of being. And so if we can sort of embrace the person with that view, if we can hold that, we have these little biases. I experience it because, coming from a legal background, I remember early on here, I didn't have the Midwestern way of greeting everybody in the hallway. And then I later found out, I was perceived as like cold or like not wanting to relate. In my world, if you don't go straight to your office, you're not working hard for the team. And that was a cultural difference that I brought to this place, that I became aware that, oh, that was perceived as me not caring. But for me, I cared by working for you. It's like I cared by not dilly-dallying in the hallways. But even something as little as that, to be like, I perceive a difference, and I interpret that difference from my cultural, socioeconomic background, right? Rather than, again, broaching it with you, moving towards you and going, hey, I noticed that you always walk straight to your office. Why is that? Being curious about each other rather than assuming that what someone does or how someone holds herself or himself is means what it would mean if you did, We just have that basic assumption. And I'm not saying that we should change that assumption. That's just the human default. But the willingness to question it as the second step, You know, we might default, oh yeah, this was my first guess, but maybe I'll actually ask. Maybe I'll inquire and be curious. Does that mean what I thought it meant? You know, and so to me, that's one way we practice, you know, our core mantra here about embracing diversity, you know, so.
I thank you very much for saying that. I think you're absolutely right. Having an interest and a desire to understand other people better. We always move through those facades that might put us off. Like you walking into your office like a little general. People think one way of it, but they don't understand it. Once they understand that, then...
Yeah, it's an act of devotion in my view, but it doesn't look like him, or, you know.
No.
It just looks like I don't care, right? And
Yeah.
it's the complete opposite, so.
Well, I thank both of you for being here. And Warren, would you want to lead us in meditation?